case presentation, but everybody is required to present and everybody is required to prepare slides for your presentation. Okay, and it doesn't have to be a lot of slides, but you do need to have slides, or whether it's a Word document or whatever you want that you are able to share with the group. Now, I believe that we ask for the slides a few days before the actual live sessions. And Aiden, you've been in on those before, right? So do you remember when we required the students to submit their slides? Yes, I know, Eddie. I'm going to talk about that in a second. That's when I get to talking about the practical.
I couldn't hear exactly which question you're referring to.
Oh, sorry. I hope my sound's better than it was before.
No,
So what I'm asking is, last year, I think, were you the TA for Dr. Moore?
For Dr. Moore? I don't remember being TA for Dr. Moore before.
So what I'm asking is if you were there for the live presentations last year. At the end, the very end, students present their cases.
Can't recall at this moment. Sorry for that.
Put you on the spot, sorry. But I did, and I apologize for that. If I recall correctly, you have to submit them before the actual presentation. I'll have that when we finish this hour and we go into the next hour after the break. So, and then there's a template for a grading rubric, so to speak. And there is a template that we'll share with you for how to lay out your case. So you can all be thinking about what case you'd like to be writing up. You can start thinking about that now. And then, if you have any questions beforehand, but I will tell you that if you do not present in that weekend, right, May 2nd and 3rd, then you will not be able to graduate, and we won't be offering it again until, yes, I'll make sure that it's posted, Geraldine. I'll make sure that, or you know what, when we come back from the break, I'll pull it up and I'll show you what the outline looks like, okay? But we'll get it up in Moodle soon, no worries. But anyway, so please, I mean, obviously in this age of COVID, we have no idea what we're going to be doing May 2nd and 3rd. But if you miss it, it will be a challenge for us to make it up. So you might end up having to delay graduation for almost a year. And I don't want that to happen. So please, do everything you can to be present. So other than that, that's the basics of what your last course, the case presentation course, is about. The other thing, let's see. Yes, so I will, yes, it's pass fail. And there is a grading rubric as well, and I'll make sure that that's up. Aiden, I don't know if you've posted that yet for 7930. If not, I just want to run it all by Dr. Shearer before I share it with you. So, I mean, is it up already, Aiden? In Moodle 7930? He's not there. That's okay. Anyway, so, but that's the basics of it. And then the other thing that I want to talk to you about is the capstone and practicum. Now, practicum in this day and age, I think that people for Alliant, the graduate students at Alliant have all been told that nobody's required to go, and it's really up to the site and the student So I don't know if that's an across the board policy for Alliant, but my feeling is that unless everybody gets better and this whole thing goes away by the summer, okay. So Carmen just said there's no material up for 7930. So I don't know if it's going to be up today because I do want to run it by Dr. Shearer first. So, but I'll get it up this week and I will show you what we've used in the past. Okay. But I just don't want you to, I don't want to give it to you yet because he may want to modify it. It's his class now. So anyway, so getting back to the capstone, nobody's required to do the capstone, but if anybody's planning on taking the PEP exam in the near future, I feel that the capstone is a good way for you to assess where you're at in terms of material. I do have people who were in, so I do a private PEP training. I have students from pretty much every program. We do it differently. We go anywhere from 3 to 5 months. We review everything from the beginning. I really work on making sure that you have some fundamentals down. So even if you don't remember a specific drug when you're taking the PEP, that you know how to work your way through that question. We did have a slew of Alliant folks from N10 who took my course. Marlon Hoover also offers a PEP prep course. I encourage people to take both because our approaches are very different. I'll tell you, I don't charge much money for it. I charge $200 as a flat fee for the 3 to 5 months. You get all my slides, you get the recordings from the sessions, and you get me, because what happens is when people are getting ready for taking the PEP, like a couple of days before, I have people who have just contacted me and said, I want to go over neuroanatomy, and we do that. Wonderful, Janelle, that would be great. I'll connect everybody with Dr. Hoover at some point. I can't put a time on it right now, but I will, so that you can, and he offers it intermittently. He offers live sessions where you can go and sit for the weekend. He offers online over like a month. So he has different formats also. And just so you know, Dr. Hoover and I are pairing up with 2 students from Fairleigh to write a PEP prep book, but there isn't really a good one at this stage. So we use a variety of different resources. Yes, well, I started in May. It's not like May 4th, but I do start usually like the weekend before, what is that holiday, Memorial Day, or, you know, it just is going to depend on everything. But I usually start sometime in May. And then, and I've had good success. I mean, I cannot parse out whether it's me or Dr. Hoover or what, because yeah, we meet on Sundays usually, and I usually go an hour and a half. When we get closer to people taking the PEP, I can go 2 hours, and it's usually on Sunday. I know that's not ideal for everybody, but there was a time when I did it weekend evenings, and it'll just depend on the group. You know, when I get 15, 25 people, I mean, this last group I had like 30 people. I was really happy, the one that I've got going on right now. But I do have 99% success in terms of people who I work with taking the PEP for the first time and passing it. So I know I don't have standard error of the mean on that, but and I don't know, I don't think it's me. I think it could be me. I mean, I do really help bend your minds to thinking about it. But I think it's also just being out of your program. Yeah, right. I don't have confidence intervals, Eddie. But I'm getting to the point where I could, but I strongly encourage people to take it right after you finish, because you know, my ex-husband was a chef, and we would go food shopping, and we'd bring like a cooler with tons of ice in it, even if we were going 15 minutes away. And he would say, you know, when you're handling fish or meat, it never gets better from how it is at this moment, right? And so the same thing with getting ready for the PEP exam. Right now, everything is going to be as fresh in your mind as it can be from 2.5 years of a program, right? You go out a year and you are going to diminish what you retain in your head. And so it just makes sense to do it right away. A lot of you are in states where you're not going to be able to prescribe. And so there used to be this concern that if you took the PEP now, that your state requirement was going to change. And, you know, if it takes 10 years for your state to pass legislation, you know, is the PEP taken this year going to be worthwhile? I will tell you that it is worthwhile, because there are people who pass the PEP and they're ready to go. And as somebody who spent a lot of years advocating for patients and increased mental health access in the legislature for Hawaii, and hopefully I'll get engaged here soon in Florida, what I can tell you is if you have 20 people in your state who have passed the PEP and are ready to go, it makes it that much harder for legislators to turn you away. And I may have told you this already, but it is one of the take-home messages of this field. So I encourage everybody to take the PEP. You can take it on your own if you prefer doing it that way, you know, but just take it soon is what I recommend. So having said all that, and we're over our break time, so I have to walk my dog. I didn't get to do that before we started. So I'm going to say let's come back on 5 after the hour. Okay, so here on the East Coast, it's almost 1 o'clock. Let's see, that's the MS program, and those take the PEP out of state. Yeah, so move out of state. So exactly, Janelle. So we need to build a coalition of people who are ready to go. Okay, it makes it that much easier, and especially in light of what's going on here. What do you mean no video? Eddie, what are you talking about? I know, I hate to say that. There is no video yet. Are you? Yeah, I didn't put up any slides, if that's what you're asking. I'll start the slide set when we come back in 10 minutes, okay? Okay, no worries. Take care. I'll be right back. Okay. Now you have my audio, right? Thank you, Eddie, for letting me know that. I was just talking briefly about Idaho, Iowa, and Illinois. There are now at least two prescribing psychologists in Idaho. Iowa has people that are completing their practicum training, so they may have prescribers maybe this year, I would say. And then Illinois has, I think it's one person who has been licensed. There's a slew of people who started their rotation training in 2018 who are about to go up to the licensing board. Okay, now you can all hear me now, right? Oh, okay. So just to encourage you, right, to maybe think about, somebody said before, it's sad in California that you have people who are leaving the state once they get licensed, or so that they can get licensed. And I don't discourage that. I mean, I think that if you are at a place in your life where you can travel and live somewhere else, that you go through that process, because then when your state does have legislation come up, you're already a prescribing psychologist. So again, it's one of those things that makes it that much harder for them to turn you away when you already have the skills and talent. So, okay, so that was the other thing. Yes, there is very little engagement in California. We need to change that. I know I was not going to go to the CPA conference this year. Yeah, Chiara, so, do you know Bob DeWars by any chance, Chiara? Okay, so he's at Harvard. Hold on one sec, I just have to cough. He's in Massachusetts. He's been out of his MSCP program for a while, but he's my favorite repeat student. He's sat in on my classes for like 3 rotations now. So he's not rushing to take the PEP, but he's very active. And there is a psychiatrist at Harvard who he collaborates with, who is actually supportive of us. So I will back channel with you if you remind me, and you may have to remind me more than once, to connect you with them. And I'm just trying to think. I had a student who passed the PEP, and she's now in Minnesota, but she's also licensed in Massachusetts as a psychologist. So she also is part of that group. Anybody from Colorado? There is a lot of talk in Colorado. Pay scale is an issue for everyone. APA, I know, has worked on that in the past. I don't know what the status of that is. So Eddie, what do you mean by pay scale issues? Maribel's asking. I mean, basically, what rate do you get reimbursed at? But I can tell you that, wait, hold on, I gotta pull this over to the front so I can see. So other than Iowa, Illinois, and Idaho, there have not been any other states that have passed. I would say Vermont, Hawaii, Washington State, and Florida maybe. I don't know about this year, but those are the 4 states that I see as potentially having legislation in the next 3 to 5 years. So yes, Eddie. So Illinois has established a group, Illinois Association of Prescribing Psychologists. Montana has not been on the list as far as I know, Amber, but there's been some backdoor, that's what I call it, but some states are very quiet about their RXP efforts. They don't want to attract a lot of attention. Nebraska, Ohio is very close, and I don't know, unfortunately, Brad Potts just posted something on, I'll get back to that in a second, that one of our champion legislators in Ohio just passed away, which is very, very sad. But, you know, so Ohio, yeah, I think it is a great motivation to get legislation passed. So Geraldine asked me, so Vermont, Florida, Hawaii, and Washington State. Ohio is on that list as well. Florida. So those are the main states. I'm thinking, am I missing something? Sorry, I gotta clear my throat again. Hold on. Sorry, I'm very congested today. So PA, yes, Philadelphia. Oh, okay. So Janelle's asking, what is SIPAC? So SIPAC is this collaborative effort of states that you can basically, if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I defined it, but it's so you have reciprocity with certain states to be able to do telehealth, right? I mean, that's the basics of it. Does anybody have a better description of SIPAC? Yeah, so, you know, so it does, and that's kind of what I was saying, with all these states that are going to be having emergency proclamations and things. I think SIPAC is the skeleton of what will be built across the country. So, yeah, it's, I don't know in terms of those other systems, but anyway. So I did want to talk to you about that because I know we're getting close to the end for you. And so I want to make sure that you have some ideas. If anybody's interested in working for the Indian Health Service, Alan Osby is, I always get confused if he's in Montana or Wyoming, but he has in the past offered some very attractive packages if you're willing to move to those states where he's got a service. I know that in Arizona, no, New Mexico, maybe Arizona too, Indian Health Service will do student loan forgiveness. They have very attractive you know, salary packages, and it's a great opportunity, and they will train you up. You know, you can do your practicum there. They will invite you to come there if you are already a licensed psychologist, if you have finished the MSCP program. I don't know if they require you to have the PEP before or after the practicum, but they will support you in that. So, Janelle, you've emailed them in California or Alan? Have you networked with Alan Osby? Nationwide, yeah. Well, it's going to take a certain person to be able to have that conversation. Okay, so I just want to read Carmen's question. How to secure an RXP internship for the 400 hours? It's not necessary. For which state is it? Are you saying 2 years? Are you talking about like New Mexico conditional or Louisiana's conditional? Yeah, so the 400 hours, 12 months is that is the military requirement. In New Mexico, they have that 2-year conditional. New Mexico, you also have to do the 80-hour physical assessment practicum. 300 hours in 3 years, yeah. It's by state. And this is one of the things that I hope to be able to bring to Division 55 is is some uniformity in legislative language, because each state is, you know, chipped away and given up things like, look at Illinois. I mean, Illinois, you basically have to do pre-med, even if it's not in the order of pre-med, but you have to take chemistry, you have to take, you know, microbiology. There's all these, you know, at the undergraduate level, there's all these requirements there, but you can do it all online. And they have the 9 rotations, you know, and I think they extended it. It was originally, you had to do the rotation within 14 months. That's changed now. And I will brag about the fact that I got them to change their requirements, because some of them were just made no sense as an educator. So, well, just some of them. I didn't get them to change the other ones. But, you know, in my book, at the end of the day, if you are at the point where you come into an MSCP program as a licensed psychologist, you are already a learner, you know, a lifelong learner. If you're willing to come back and brutalize yourself for another 2.5 years, you already know how to learn. And so to me, the level of chemistry that you get, you don't have to go through 2 semesters of, you know, intro chemistry and organic chemistry, because you know how to learn about chemistry enough that you will have the material that you need when it comes to making medication decisions. And I don't put anybody down for doing that. I think it's fabulous. But, you know, it'll be very interesting in Illinois to see if there's any change in how they're prescribing or practicing because they had those courses. I feel like, you know, and I have revamped the biochem course for Alliance so that they get some more fundamentals in biochemistry, but, you know, so I do a little more organic chemistry. So anyway, so I digress, but, you know, so it really is just going to depend, but the 400 hours, it's going to depend on the state. Now, Idaho just allowed, they changed their rules. I want to make sure it's Idaho, it might be Iowa. One of those 2 states just changed the rules as to who you can do your practicum training with. They originally only had a psychiatrist. Now I believe they've added MDs. They still don't allow nurse practitioners. And I'm not sure about DOs. So they're, you know, and this is what happens. You pass your legislation, get it passed, whatever it takes, and then you chip away at those things that are kind of meaningless. So, you know, not everybody has a psychiatrist available to do your practicum with, but in the military, they did change the rules. I think it was 2016 that you can be on a site where you're doing your practicum and be supervised by a psychiatrist or an MD through you know, through the internet, basically. So the psychiatrist does not have to be there at the site where you are to go over your cases with you. They can be at another site. So, you know, the rules are changing everywhere. So, all right, now this is the second hour that I've spent a lot of time on all this other stuff, which is okay, but I do want to get started on my slides. And there's 72 slides in this set. I'm not going to go too quickly, but I'm not going to dwell on a lot of the points that I feel at this stage of the game you guys already understand. So, so let's get started. It is this last slide said drug research methodology and regulatory issues. I do have a whole other slide set on statistics. I'm going to screen you. You can just type in, do you want statistics or not? Because in the past, I've had groups that want statistics. I've had groups that don't. And I know some of you have PhDs, so you already know statistics. So, and I won't be offended either way, but overload. Okay, so that's fine. Great. All right. So I'm going to go through some of the things now. I don't know if you've had this with Dr. Tackett or not in terms of regulatory. So Eddie, you and I can spend some time doing stats. How's that? Anyway, so I did want to make sure that I go through the process of what the FDA does. So I'm going to go through these slides now. And I think you've had some of it already, but I've updated this in terms of there have been some changes in the last 3 years in terms of FDA efforts. So here's what the FDA does. I think you all know this by now. They approve products, they look at safety, they look at effectiveness, and then they do the risk-benefit determination. Because as we know, with any drug, you have to weigh risk-benefit because the drug may have adverse reactions, the drug may have drug-drug interactions, but in your patient, it may be that there is one drug that will work the best. So that's what they cover. They're going to monitor drug performance. I think we already talked about market surveillance, right? Whether it's in the United States, it's post-market surveillance. In Europe, it's called pharmacovigilance. But either way, you monitor your drug performance. You monitor the investigational studies. If you have not gone to, trials, I think it's fda.trials.gov, I think. I have it in one of my slides, but if you want to know what studies are being done right now, can you get your patient into a study? A new drug is being evaluated for the first time, or you have a drug that they've actually gone through the process of trying to get an off-label use on label, or appropriate aspects of it. So they're going to monitor all of those studies. And I think you've seen over the years in the literature, every now and then FDA pulls a drug from the post-market surveillance because they're suddenly seeing an increase in cardiac problems or this or that. So that's what's going on when the FDA monitors these investigational studies. They also inspect manufacturers and they circulate information to physicians and consumers. And so when you are prescribing, or if you have a patient who somebody else is prescribing to, you may not get that information because you're not the prescriber, but you need to know if there is a problem with a drug that your patient's taking. Okay? Your patient can be in limbo like me. I'm now on different insurance, but I don't have a doctor here. I found a doctor. The first they can see me is May 15th. So I have prescriptions from Hawaii, and my Hawaii doctor is not willing to renew because I'm no longer on Hawaii insurance. And so it can be a mess. So you may have patients who fall into those, fall in the cracks that way. So you need to be up to speed, even if you're not getting that information directly from the FDA. And that's where some of the FDA MedWatch and those things come in. How many of you already prescribed to MedWatch? Okay, good, great. I'll speed through that then when I get to that in the slides. I'm going to move this far so it's not right in one of the slides. Let's see. I guess that's as far as I can. Okay. So it is a lengthy process. I will go through this for you. You may or may not have had this already, but your drug gets developed. You do animal testing. Then you put in investigational new drug application. That's the IND, okay? Not to be confused with the NDA. right? So the IND is your initial application based on toxicity in animals, whether it has a benefit if there is an animal model or the disease state that you're looking at, okay? So that goes to the FDA. The FDA says, go ahead and start your human trials. And they do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And sometimes they refer to post-market surveillance as phase 4. So those are the basic steps. At that stage, after you've had phase 3, there is a review committee that evaluates all the information that's been provided. The company then does an NDA application, new drug application. So this is investigational. This is the actual application. And these do differ a lot because of what happens in the human trials. You know, the data that you get is going to be different than what you would. Sorry, I had to cough. So, and then you have your application review. They decide on what the drug labeling is. They will inspect the facility where the drug is going to be manufactured. And at that stage, you have FDA approval. Okay? This is just a more current overview for you, especially when you do become prescribers. You know, it's pretty straightforward. But just in case you have, you have a patient who comes in and they're on in phase 2, they're part of a phase 2 study. This is just summary of what they do. And this is from FDA.gov. Okay. And this gives you a little bit more background. I'm sorry, I just have to clear my throat. Sorry about that. And there is this phase, it's called preclinical, that is the animal research. And then they have phase 0, which is not really an existing phase, but you should be aware that from time to time, there will be reference to phase 0. And that's just working out the pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics in some patients. It's a lower dose than what you would expect to prescribe, and it's a small number of patients, and it's often skipped, but it does exist sometimes, so you should know about it. Phase 1 is going to be ascending dosage. It's a safety check. These are healthy people. They're not anybody with a disease necessarily. Phase 2 is going to be therapeutic, trying to figure out the dose. You have a larger group. And this is for internal validity, basically, versus external validity, which is the thousands of patients that you do in phase 3. And this is, in patients and making sure that whatever happens in those patients is documented. And so that's interesting, Najib. I'm going to talk about orphan drugs in a little bit because the process is different. And my impression for the chloroquine was that they had skipped a lot of this because it is a drug that already exists. Yeah, they want to evaluate the therapeutic dose. So, so that's my feeling. If it's a drug that already exists for other treatments, they don't necessarily go through this process. But I think you're absolutely right that they are doing a big screening at this point to look for toxicity. I'm going to say something here that I know that Dr. Brady is going to do legal aspects of prescribing with you. I used to work at a law firm, and some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world were my clients. And a lot of these drugs, including chloroquine, hydrochloroquine, if there's a plaintiff's lawyer out there who doesn't have it on their list of drugs that they sue manufacturers for, it will be on there tomorrow. I've seen these web pages for plaintiffs' lawyers. They have A through Z, and they have every possible drug in the alphabet as a drug that you can sue a company for. And so that to me is the largest reason why a lot of companies, if they have a drug, hold on, I'm so sorry, but my throat is not clearing. I probably need another decongestant today. Anyway, so I know that quinine, for example, is on some of these plaintiffs' lists. Now, I drink quinine for restless leg syndrome. It works really well, you know, in the form of tonic water. But there are reasons why quinine is prescribed. And so I think that the biggest challenge is going to be how does the FDA respond to this emergent need and balance, right? Risk-benefit analysis. How do they decide what dose is effective? You've got a moving target, right? This disease state, one, you can have carriers who don't have any symptoms or they have mild symptoms. And then you can have people who are dying from it. And so it's going to be interesting. I don't know if, did I ever talk to you about peptide T? Peptide T was a drug that was approved for orphan drug evaluation for HIV. This is back in the 90s, I think, late 80s, 90s. And it's a very ingenious drug. It was basically the peptide sequence for part of the envelope protein for HIV. So it was a small, you know, peptide amino acid chain. And the idea was that peptide T would block the receptors that that portion of the envelope protein was able to bind to, and thereby block symptoms of HIV. And they were thinking, the inventors were or discoverers were thinking that it could be used prophylactically. So they were in phase 2 trials. I lived in New York City at the time. I knew a lot of people who were HIV positive, and I knew some people that were in the phase 3, well, the equivalent of the phase 3 trial, and they were dying. One, their T4 cells were not increasing, and two, they were dying. So in a wholly separate realm of my life, and I was a bench scientist at the time, the people who discovered peptide T or developed it came to the lab that I was working in, and they wanted to see if there was any, analgesic properties, because the G protein envelope of HIV had some overlap with another neuropeptide that had analgesic effects. So I used to inject drugs into the intrathecal space of animals, and I'd have these chronic tubes that I had implanted, and then we could administer whatever it was we needed to. So I was administering peptide T. And what was just astounding was any animal that got peptide T, and it was a blinded, control study. So I had saline and, or the solution that I used as the vehicle for peptide T. And I could tell immediately which animals got the peptide T. They were dying within 3 days. They developed ulcers. They were bleeding from their eyes. I mean, it was a really stereotypical response that was happening. And here I am killing my animals, and I don't know what it is. Is there an infection? But my control animals did not have any of those reactions. I then take the control animals and flip them in that split plot design that we talked about. And, and then or crossover study really. And then those same animals that had gotten the vehicle were now dying within 3 days. And I actually got a patent for it as a model for studying drugs for HIV, for AIDS, in animals, because there really weren't any animal models for AIDS at the time. There were some HTLV models in monkeys, I think, where they were able to give HTLV, which is a relative of HIV. But there really weren't any models to study the effects of medications. And so here I was just giving this peptide T thing, I'm going to cause, induce analgesia, and I'm killing the animals. So the people who had invented it or discovered it were trying to silence me. And it turned out, so that's how I got my job at the law firm, actually, because I had a friend who worked for the lawyers, and I was like, I may need a lawyer to protect myself. And I ended up getting a job there. But it turned out to be a reliable model. I ended up leaving the lab, so I don't know what happened to it. But I think there were some other groups that were trying to follow up with it. But I tell you that long-winded story because here was a drug that had been orphaned, that you had patients with HIV who were dying. And of course, they all thought that they were dying from HIV, not the drug. I think it ended up failing in the clinical trial. And so that's an example, and I'm going to talk to you about orphan drugs in a little bit, but that's an example of jumping the gun on hydroxychloroquine. And hopefully they can test it, but I think the challenge is going to be how much leniency is the FDA going to give because they're grasping at straws, right? So we'll see how it goes. I mean, after our lunch break, I think we can maybe look at some of that material. Thank you for reminding me about that, Najib. So anyway, so this is what you've already got, but what this does show you is that there are stages that are therapeutic, right, versus those stages that are not therapeutic, but more just checking safety and tolerance, right? Phase 2 is for internal validity. Phase 3 is external validity. And then here's an example where phase 4 is post-market surveillance. And it can be millions of patients, and the companies are paying for all of that. Once the drug is released, anybody that's eligible can prescribe it. Okay. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these slides. It's just a reminder of what falls under preclinical, what falls under that phase 0, and pharmacokinetics. What we're trying to establish is how does the body respond to the drug and how does the drug respond to the body, right? And that's your phase 0, which we don't always have. And then here's our human pharmacology trials, safety, toxicity, efficacy, right? And they do try to establish a dose range in phase 1 if they can. And then it is healthy volunteers, except for when a medication's being tested for a serious condition. So, when there's no alternative available. So this is kind of what they were doing with peptide T back in the day. Here's phase 2, we call it therapeutic exploratory trials. Going to be a small group. You're still doing safety and toxicity, establishing your dose range better, and yes, Maribel, good question. It's healthy volunteers. So it's first to see if in a healthy person, a problem's going to come up. Well, I agree, but before you treat a patient, they get people who have good kidney function, cardiac, liver, so they've been screened for all those things, and they're given the drug, and we see if that drug is going to hurt somebody who's healthy. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yes, it's not testing efficacy at that point. Now we're testing efficacy here, and then here's our phase 3. And these are what we call, yes. Oh, okay. Yep. So here's phase 3. It's also called therapeutic confirmatory trials. So we've established in our phase 2 that people aren't going to die from it, and multiple trials are permitted. This is where FDA approval requires submitting all of the data. And I don't know, did you guys hear about that lawsuit recently? I can't remember if we talked about it last week or last time we met, against the FDA. I think it's against the FDA for allowing companies to not submit all of their data. And the FDA was permitting companies to, you know, or I guess they were taking it at face value. I'm not sure if the companies were at fault. It's an ongoing issue as to whether all of the data was submitted. And what we're going to talk about a little later is this idea that the information that your patients get, if it's from an ad on TV or or is it in the package insert or whatever, but your patients come to you and they want to get a drug, and is the advertising based on all the data, or is it based on selective data? That's what we're going to talk about. It is. Yep, they control what's published. And not just published in the literature, though. The point of this is that they are collecting data, and so the drug companies often will scrap a test that they're using for assessment. They'll go, you know, HAM-A, they'll go to a different number of questions. You know, there's HAM-D, I think there's the 10 and 17 question forms, you know, so they'll use different things, and then they won't present all of that data. And so that is going to have to change. It will change, but it does still exist. So then the NDA review, it's about 10 months, 6 months for priority drugs. And I think in the case of COVID, they're even scrapping that at this point. And then here's the exclusivity. So this is when a company develops the drug. For orphan drugs, that company has 7 years. If it's a new chemical, 5 years. Reformulation. So like if you have your drug on the market for 6 years, and then you go to an extended release form, you only have 3 years under patent protection for that. Pediatric exclusivity, there's an extra 6 months for applications for pediatrics, and exclusivity can survive patent expiration. Usually the approach companies take is as that drug that they do have marketing rights to, as that patent is going to expire a couple of years before, they start developing a slight different version of it. Now, in this day and age, people just get the drug. They will make a generic, even though you know, it defies the marketing rights, you know, that's granted by FDA, and they run with a generic. And there are companies like Teva that's all they do is generics, right? And they capture them. So anyway, so companies in the current atmosphere that we're in, companies are built to spend a lot of money up front, and then are always at risk for losing money because of lawsuits or losing money because of generics coming in. So I'm going to read a couple of questions. Generics do not have to go through all the phases. That is correct. They do have to go through bioequivalency. I think I'm going to talk about that coming up, but in general, the companies that do generics do not have to go through all of this. They remember my cohort slide. Well, it's true, time and money. All of this is millions of dollars, right? And probably tens of millions or maybe even hundreds of millions at this point, because the company knows it's going to get sued. If there's an A to Z list for plaintiffs' lawyers, you know that whatever that company develops is going to be up for grabs in terms of mass tort litigation. Just so you know, in this country, if you have a lawsuit against your drug that requires biomonitoring, right? So let's say I come up with a new drug, and after my post-market surveillance has started, we realize that blonde men aged 70 to 80 develop kidney failure when they're taking that drug, right? So the plaintiff's lawyers, so let's say the FDA requires me to have a black box warning because of those data. So the plaintiff's lawyers are going to jump all over that and start suing that company, even though it's an older population, very limited, because there is a change in the listing with FDA of the drug and warnings that get issued. There's going to be an automatic start of a lawsuit. So let's say there was a biomarker in those patients, and the state that we're suing in says, okay, you can monitor for that biomarker in your patients. The lawyers for the plaintiffs who brought this to the state judicial system, they are going to get 30% of the cost of biomonitoring, even though they don't do anything in terms of the biomonitoring. Once the lawsuit has passed and there's a biomarker requirement, the plaintiff's lawyers get 30% of the overall cost of that. And so that's kind of what any drug that a company develops, that has to be built in. I mean, I worked on litigation, $40 billion for one suit. So it gets very expensive. And of course, these companies that are public, they have a board that they have to report to, and it gets very expensive. What is a biomarker? Okay, so let's say that we think that the drug is causing hepatocarcinoma. We go to the judge allows for biomonitoring. We are going to have a study of anybody who took that drug in that state is going to have their ALT, AST. So biomarker monitoring is you have to be able to establish that a lab test is reflective of the condition, right? So thanks to Hy Zimmerman many decades ago now, he came up with Hy's law for hepatotoxicity, right? So he came up with this idea that you can monitor ALT, AST, bilirubin, and jaundice in patients. And if ALT, AST are 2.5 times greater than the normal range, they consider that drug-induced hepatotoxicity, okay? So the courts would require that company to pay for us to monitor those men who were 70 to 80 years old, who were blonde at one time, to monitor their liver enzymes every 6 months for the rest of their lives, or whatever it's going to be. So that's what a biomarker monitoring would be. And that's what you get with a class action monitoring claim. Okay. So just to get us back on, well, actually it's 2 o'clock here almost. So is it lunchtime now, or we have 1 more hour to go?
We still have 1 more hour, but if it's okay, I can run the attendance at this point.
Okay, go ahead and do your attendance. And perhaps it was funny because Aiden, this is what Aiden was demonstrating to the faculty when we were meeting with them earlier in the week. Thank you so much for doing that, Aiden.
My pleasure.
Okay, so let me ask you guys, what do you guys want to do? Should we take a 10-minute break? Should we take a 5-minute break, and then we're on the hour again? Do you want to do that? And then we'll go back to getting our breaks. Okay. All right. So we'll just take 5 minutes right now. We'll come back on the top of the hour. We'll go for 50 minutes, and then we'll take our lunch break. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And make sure you do your attendance. Okay, let's stick to the time. We'll do 50 minutes now. And you can stop me if I go over, okay? Okay, so we talked about phase 3, and that's the big one usually. And then here's phase 4, otherwise known as your post-market surveillance. This is your therapeutic use trial. We do safety evaluations. So I did want to point something out to you all. MedWatch, there's an online reporting form that is used. And unfortunately, anybody can submit to it. And so what we have is, and this is true for drugs that are in litigation or there's potential litigation, you can make a complaint, your mother can make a complaint, your child can make a complaint, your lawyer can make a complaint. So anybody can go on and say, I have, you know, whatever, liver problems, or I'm constipated. Can you all hear me? Somebody's making noise. Abdul, I'm gonna mute you. That's what it is. Aiden, you may need to do that. Can you mute? There we go. Thank you. So anyway, so the adverse reactions. No worries, Abdul. You're fine. The adverse reactions that get reported to FDA are not screened in terms of frequency of reporting, right? And so you can get 20 people reporting about you know, one person. So it's unfortunate that that's the process, but it really is very hard to monitor otherwise for the FDA to say, oh no, only patients. So that's the back end for FDA. They have to go through and parse out and see if they can figure out, you know, how many reports, how many of these reports are for one person. But that's the foundation for starting an investigation post-market to determine if there's a need for black box warnings or additional warnings. The other thing for you to always look out for is if there's an FDA warning for your drug, they can still try to sue you for that, even though you've warned, you know, so it's a different suit. They're not going to sue you for failure to warn. They're going to sue you for, you know, some smoking gun that you didn't publish all the data, or you know, the company was hiding something. You know, we get that a lot. So it's not necessarily because of a specific problem that is new. It can be an old problem as well. Okay, so that's your phase 4. And we do monitor for high-risk populations that haven't been included so far. So if there's going to be pregnant women and children, you have to keep an eye on those specifically. Okay. So this slide's a couple of years old. I go in every year or so and try to update the lists of drugs. But I thought it was of value to you to know what's commonly prescribed or what's new, right? Because you have a patient, they come to you, they're constipated, they have GERD, they have hypertension, they're overweight. You can add 6 things to that, and they're getting either a new drug or an old drug for all of those things, right? So you are then going to prescribe hopefully behavioral therapy first, but if that's not going to work, you may prescribe a medication. And so it behooves you to not only know about existing drug-drug interactions, but also to know what drugs are coming out, what new drugs are on the market, that there isn't a lot of post-market surveillance data, right? And so in a patient like the one I just described with 6 different other issues going on, you may decide not to give an SSRI, you may decide to give some other medication, or you may decide to go with a drug like an SSRI that has a lot of history, right? So, but either way, you know, this was from 2017, and these were some of the new drugs that had come onto the market. And, you know, a lot of this is for MS. This one was for dermatitis or eczema. You've probably seen Dupixent, I think is how they pronounce it. You've seen ads for that on TV. Okay, this one is epithelial ovarian fallopian tube or peritoneal cancers. Zejula is the name of the drug. Here's for other kinds of carcinomas. Here's a drug that came out for Parkinson's. If I remember correctly, this drug is actually for adverse reactions to L-DOPA over time. So I'm pretty sure this is the drug that is for psychosis. Anyway, so this is from the FDA Center, CDER, right? And I go on there from time to time and just kind of look at what new drugs are coming on. One, because I teach about this, but two, because I think it's really important for you guys to know that there are drugs that your patients are taking, that there's not a lot of data out there. So there could come adverse event report warnings, there could come a black box or whatever. So, you know, so that's just, so this is at the FDA. I think I have something coming up that has the, it's the FDA CDER. If you can see that on the bottom, it's the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. Okay. But I have the URL coming up somewhere. So right now I wanted to just talk to you about some changes that have taken place over the years. This is novel device approval. So, of course, the FDA doesn't just oversee medications, they also oversee medical devices. And so this was a trend of the number, this is, let's see, this is novel devices include original PMA. So this is post-market application, pre-post. Panel track supplement PMAs. And so this is just, they're showing that there's been a 4-fold increase in the number of novel device approvals that were taking place. I think this is numbers. It's not entirely clear, but yeah, it's the number of devices. So there has been a dramatic increase from 2013 to 2017, and I believe that trend is still ongoing. So, so this is just so you're aware that you know, there's been a big increase, and medical devices include drug delivery systems. Right now, I'm not talking about the pills that come in extended release necessarily. That still falls under FDA drug approval. But there are mini pumps, there's all kinds of devices that get implanted in people that are related to drug delivery. So, as well as like the syringes, the delivery system for Invega and some of your, you know, your psychotropic meds that can be delivered through injection or delivery system. The buprenorphine, there are these little pellets that you can implant. Those also get, it depends on the design of them, but they can be under device. The delivery system for implanting them is under novel device. So there's a lot of changes that are going on with medication delivery that are relevant to you, even though it's medical devices, you think, oh, that's not really what I'm doing. You do need to be aware when new medical devices come on the market. Okay, so this was generic drugs that are approved. So they do get approved by FDA. There was a question about that before, and I wanted to make sure that we clarify. Deciding that a drug is going to become generic or over the counter is under the FDA, okay? But they don't require all of that testing that the companies had to go through when they developed the drug. because they consider them bioequivalent. Now, I don't know if you all remember, I'm going to say this could be over 20 years now, so you may not have been thinking about drugs, but there was an issue with thyroxine, right? I've taken Synthroid for a lot of years now, more than half my life. And at one point, there was a generic version that came on the market that the company was trying to quash. They were trying to say that it was not bioequivalent, right? The generic that this company had developed out of San Francisco. I think it was Boots, Bootes. And so there was this whole lawsuit and everything, and it was established that levothyroxine could be sold as a generic. Well, I switched over because my insurance company wasn't going to cover Synthroid anymore. And boy, did I have a problem with it. And then it turned out that the generic pills, there was a problem with the manufacturing of them. So I was basically hypothyroid, even though I was taking the generic for 4 months. And I don't know if you've ever had hypothyroidism or seen it, but it can be pretty miserable. It can kill you, right? And let me see, interesting book, Bottle of Lies, yes. So there's also a book that somebody from HMSA, which is the insurance umbrella for Hawaii, called Overtreated, and it's about, you know, how drug companies and how we as a country and our insurance companies have been overprescribing. There are a lot of interesting books on those subjects. So thank you, Rebecca, for pointing out that one. So this is just to show you the full approvals versus the tentative approvals. There's been a lot of full approvals granted just in, this is 2017, right? And then this is the comparison. There were 1,027 total. These data were published in 2018, even though it was for 2017. And it was 843, I think. I'm going to, a little small on the slide, but 843 full approvals for drugs in the United States going to generics. Okay? So a lot of drugs now flooding the market that your patients can get over the counter. It's interesting. I got prescribed a decongestant. I think you all know I had that problem with my eustachian tubes, is what I think it was, for about 9 months now. And my doctor prescribed over-the-counter decongestants for me, so I was getting them for free. And then at some point, my insurance said, we are not covering this by insurance anymore because it's over-the-counter. You can buy it. And so the pharmacy still gave me a discount on it, even though, you know, it was over the counter, but my insurance company would not cover it anymore. So as drugs move to over the counter, the insurance companies watch that so that they know that they don't have to pay for certain drugs anymore, okay? So this is just to give you an idea of the world of what your patients are going to be exposed to, right? So that many more drug-drug interactions that you have to pay attention to. And also know the adverse reactions to those drugs that your patient's taking, because if you then add in the psychotropic med and some symptoms start flaring up, what's the chicken, what's the egg, right? What's the causation, Bradford Hill criteria, right? So here's a list of drugs that were up for grabs in terms of going generic in 2020, okay? Some of them, here's Cipro, right? Some of them are antibiotics. Some of them are, here's hydralazine, sorry. You know, so there are some drugs that you'll recognize, some drugs that you don't. I'm just looking briefly through this list. Here's naltrexone. So naltrexone's going to go generic this year. Let's see, here's thalidomide, back for more. But thalidomide is supposed to go generic this year. Obviously, you don't want to give it to your female patients. Here's Qsymia. It's phentermine topiramate. And does anybody know what that's used for? Why that drug's, what's the indication for that drug? Weight loss, good, Abdullah. So, and I don't know if you all remember the fen-phen fiasco crisis from, again, it's probably over 20 years, but people were taking fen-phen, it was phentermine. I'm trying to remember what the other fen was. It's FEN, like, sorry, my brain's blocking it, it'll come to me. But people were taking it for weight loss, and there were cardiac concerns that came up, and the whole world was in a panic. But so Qsymia is part of that. Fenfluramine, right? I think that's what the other fen was. But anyway, but this is going generic now. This Qsymia for weight loss. Let's just see what else. Anyway, so there's lots of drugs that are coming on the market that are going to be generic, which is good because it's for your patients, so they don't have to pay more money. But it also means that there's more availability of these drugs, and so your patients may be taking more of them than they were previously because they were cost prohibitive. Okay. Hold on. Okay, so in response to the opioid crisis of the last few years, the FDA, this is from 2018, established the Opioids Policy Steering Committee, and their main task was to have the FDA reevaluate drugs that are already on the market, both for legitimate purposes and for misuse and abuse. And as we know, most of the crisis with fentanyl was largely because of black market sales of drugs that phentermine was put into. And so you were having a lot of overdoses because of the potency of fentanyl. And then they were just putting it in all kinds of drugs that were black market. And so, you know, it was really a crisis above and beyond the prescribing practices for opioids. It was just a huge travesty of collision of different factors that resulted in our country suffering the way we have. And so we now have this Opioids Policy Steering Committee to help the FDA in evaluating drugs. And there was a drug, I don't know if I have the slides about it. Here it is, yeah, Opana. So Opana, so this was the first drug that was used under that opioid council or committee to remove from the market for their application. So Opana ER first approved in 2006 for the management of moderate to severe pain when a continuous around-the-clock opioid analgesic was needed for an extended period of time. So in 2012, Endo replaced, that's the company, replaced the original formulation of Opana ER with a new formulation that was intended to make the drug resistance to physical and chemical manipulation for abuse, right? So people were taking the Opana ER, breaking it up, snorting and injecting it. So they came up with this new formulation to avoid that problem. And then it met regulatory standards for approval, but the FDA determined that the data did not show that the reformulation could be expected to reduce abuse in a meaningful way and they declined the company's request to include that in the labeling. Now, with more information about the risks of the reformulated product, the agency is taking steps to remove the reformulated Opana ER from the market. So this was a really good example of how FDA governance can have a positive effect on patient outcome. So anyway, so this is a summary slide on clinical trials. Just so you know that there's about, it takes 10 to 15 years to go from the lab, the chemistry bench to, this is, well, it says US patients before it gets to patients. Only 1 in 5,000 compounds make it to human testing. So, right, so phase 1, right? Only 1 in 5 tested in humans is approved. And then these are the testing phases in humans. This discovery is equivalent to phase 0. Okay. So this is just an example of the cost of controls. Patients in Canada and Western Europe wait longer for new medications than the United States does. So we tend to get drugs to market sooner than other companies, okay? Countries, I'm sorry, I said companies. Countries, and so that's just what this is indicating. And then just so you know, I think you all know this, but the FDA has new tobacco rules. So in 2009, there was the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. Gave FDA the authorization to control tobacco products. 2016, there was a new ruling for regulating tobacco products, but including hookahs, e-cigs, dissolvables, all of the kinds of delivery systems, if you will, for tobacco or for nicotine, really. So it's not even about tobacco per se. It's about any, they lump all of these into tobacco products. Even though an e-cigarette is not tobacco, it's for the purposes of addiction and nicotine exposure. So this came out last year around this time. The FDA is proposing to end current compliance policy for flavored electronic nicotine delivery systems. And then let's see, so the pre-marketing applications to the agency are due in August 8th, 2021. So we will see, here, hold on. I got a question. I would not say that, Eddie. I don't, are you talking about, here, let me just go back. This slide, is this the one you're talking about? Yeah, no. So first of all, their surveillance is different. You know, their post-marketing surveillance is different. And their entire process. I do have some slides. I don't know if they're in this slide set, but I do have slides comparing Europe with, and countries that have socialized medicine, basically, because that includes Canada, with the US process. Now, I will tell you that countries like in South America have a very fast approval process. And so what happens a lot, I had a patent that I've been working on that it's a surgical application. And we go to South America to do the clinical trials because there you have so much less red tape to get to the clinical trials that you can get it done there in a year, whereas it would take longer here. So I hope that answered your question, or at least gave you an idea of the differences. But it could be in this slide set, but if not, I got it somewhere. So anyway, so smoking, so these are things that are coming. You all are probably trained in nicotine or tobacco cessation practices for your patients. this is going to be interesting the way this thing all turns out. The companies are going to have a lot of public relations work as well as putting in pre-market applications. But it's because of this 2016 ruling that the FDA is now able to do this. Okay? Sorry, I had to cough. I'm not muted, right? I'm unmuted. Let me see. Yeah, unmuted. Okay. So now we'll talk a little bit about OTC drugs. These are the ones that your patients are not going to think about when you ask them what medications they take. They are not going to think about antihistamines or aspirin or anything unless you ask them very specifically, do you take a medication for GERD? Do you take a medication over the counter? Vitamins, what vitamins are they taking? What, what kind of supplements are they taking? So I lump supplements in with OTC, even though they're separate from OTC in terms of FDA regulation. But in my mind, your patient's going to walk in to a pharmacy. Oh, this is on sale. I'm going to buy some of this. This is 2 for 1. I'm going to get this. And then they take it. And if you don't know that they're taking that drug, they may have bleeding problems if they're on an SSRI, right? So you always have to get to the bottom line. And I give you that information knowing that you're going to be doing your case presentations at the end of this, your program. And so think about that in terms of what questions you need to ask for their taking their medical history, right? Okay. And so here's where the CDER that I was talking about before, and here's a link to FDA.gov for drugs. So the OTC drugs are defined as a drug that's safe and effective for general use, and you don't have to go to a health professional for it. They are processed by the CDER, okay? And this is of the Office of Drug Evaluation, and it's the Non-Prescription Drug Advisory Committee. So they do evaluate over-the-counter drugs. It's not like it's released and then they don't think about it anymore. Once a drug is on the market as an OTC, they're going to monitor for adverse reactions, reports that are coming into MedWatch. They will keep an eye on it, but it's a different branch of FDA that's doing it, okay? FDA reviews the active ingredients and the labeling of over 80 therapeutic classes of drugs. Okay. Now, the OTC drug monograph was developed and published in the Federal Register. You all know what the Federal Register is, right? I mean, states have their equivalent. This is where any rule overseen by the US government is published in the FR. Always got those little squiggly lines in front of it. CFR, exactly. So you can also call it just CFR. So this is where the drug monograph is going to be published, okay, for your drug. Let's see. Yep, they established a standardized format for it. Okay. So physicians and consumers agree over-the-counter medicines are the preferred line of treatment unless you have a patient who is on very limited funds, because then if it's a drug that can be prescribed, your patient will not have to pay $17 a bottle or whatever it is. So it really is going to depend. That's not something you as a prescriber, I don't think, is ever going to prescribe, but you may have patients who have limitations in what they can pay for, and that would be really the only instance where a prescription is better than an OTC. So 3/4 of all primary care physicians recommend an OTC before a prescription, and 2/3 of consumers prefer taking an OTC. Yeah, so, Rebecca asked about Canadian pharmacies. People do that as Israel also has like a really good list of OTC drugs that you can buy in bulk. So people do it. We don't regulate it, right? And so it does become difficult if there is a batch that has contaminants or something that's going to make your patient sick. We don't have any means to look at it, but it's a lot cheaper, right? So it can go both ways. There are risks to doing that, and there are benefits. So anyway, so the medications that they included were for allergies, pain, cough and cold, acid reflux, upset stomach. And those are the main categories that we talk about for OTCs. Remember what to ask remember to ask what the patient is taking. Okay, so this is a projection, and the colors are a little too similar in my book, although I'm not colorblind. It could be close with this one. So here they've got a list of analgesics, cold, cough, and flu, weight loss, GI, skin, minerals and vitamins, sleep aids, ophthalmic, and others, right? And so this is 2013. So this is real data up to 2016, I think. That was the last data set. And then they're projecting out. So by 2024, they are expecting at least let's say, 40% more, 20 to 30, 40% more OTCs on the market, okay? So, and this is international. This is international market survey data, okay? But it includes the US, but it includes all countries. So, you know, so what's the biggest one? What's this one? This is minerals, vitamins, and food supplements, right? This big one. It's just going to keep increasing. And then this one is, I think it's cold, cough, and flu, right? So these are things that are going to interact with your drugs. Now, cost of drug approval. I do admit to having bias towards companies. I never think of a company as big pharma because I know people who work for companies, they're people. I know the people who have been the CEOs and presidents of boards of some large pharmaceutical companies. They do make a hell of a lot of money, but I don't think of them as the devil. And, you know, so I do have a bias that tends away to of some of the comments that you'll see in these slides. I did get some of these slides from Bob McGrath when I took over this course for Alliant in, maybe 8 years ago now. I've been doing it for a while. Anyway, so I didn't change his slides on this though, so that I give you both perspectives. So do drug companies exaggerate the costs of developing a drug? Of course, it would make sense that they would, because then they're arguing that they should be able to extend their patents, that the FDA needs to crack down on people who are, you know, just taking the medication, figuring out what's in it, and making a generic, even if it's selling it on the black market until the patent expires. And like I said, you know, litigation is a huge cost, but, you know, reasons why they might exaggerate the costs is one, to justify the high prices, to oppose regulation that would result in them not being able to charge what they want. Oops, sorry. And then justify favorable legislation. So legislation that would not affect the drug companies as much. So those are some justifications. They include capitalized costs. That's what I was talking about with lawsuits. They do project out on these costs. Hold on, I can't, there's my cursor. But a company has to. I mean, a company has stakeholders, and the stakeholders are going to demand to know, why are we paying out this, you know, $25 billion payout to, you know, thousands of people? The companies need to, they're the investors, you know, so they need to know, why is this going to cost me so much? And long before any drug reaches the market, those costs are all built into the cost of the pill when they release it. And estimates vary widely, so it can be from 0.5 to 1.5 billion per drug, but others estimated much lower. One sec. Okay, so the funnel, I mean, this is a way we think about those costs and everything. When you develop a medication, as I said before, there's a lot that you start with. About 250 will make it to preclinical trials, 10 will make it to an IND. That's the first of the applications, right? And then only 2 to 3 of those will reach marketing. So I need to go back and update that. But, you know, I think it's very true, though. I don't think we get a lot of drugs out of these efforts. This slide shows you the drugs that are, this is US sales in billions of dollars, okay? This was from 2018 Nature reviews. So Humira was the top selling drug for 2018. This is Revlimid, right? I don't know if I said that right. Here's a Herceptin. I'm just looking to see if there's any drug. Here's Lyrica, okay? So Lyrica is the highest paying psychotropic drug. Yes, the Humira is very expensive. Now, some companies, I don't know how much they do this anymore. You know, I've got COPD, and I needed my medication. It was a new medication, wasn't covered by insurance, and the company actually gave me the drug for free for a year, but you have to qualify. I had just moved to Florida. I wasn't, not to Hawaii. I wasn't working yet, and so you know, they gave me the drug for a year. You know, so some companies will do that, but you as your patient's advocate need to establish that, either with the drug company itself, the sales reps, or you know, you give the patient the guidance to barter, not barter, but you know, work with the company to see if they can get it at a lower price. Also, pharmacies also have a lot of incentive programs to help patients out. So, you know, GoodRx is something that's come out recently that a pharmacist will automatically apply if it's available. So, anyway, so, but yes, Humira is very expensive, and as a result, they're making lots of money on it. And over here on the right are the companies that make the most money. Now look, Pfizer, Novartis, and Roche. Now, Pfizer is down here with their Prevnar, okay? So they're not making a lot of money on that particular drug. Where's Novartis? It's not even on this list of most, you know, money made on a drug, and yet Novartis is making the most money, right? So it's not necessarily a one-to-one relationship between the two as to, you know, making the most on the drug and the companies that make the most money. But they make a lot of money. I mean, that's pretty impressive, $47.6 billion in sales. So they have other drugs, Pfizer has other drugs that make a lot of money for them. Okay. This is for top psychiatric drugs because, as you saw in the last slide, Lyrica is the one that's closest to making money, right? And so here's Lyrica on the top. This is revenue in millions of dollars, US dollars. So here's Vyvanse, Invega Sustenna or Sustenna. Here's Latuda, Cymbalta, Abilify, Namenda, Seroquel, Pristique. Okay, so this is revenue in millions of US dollars made from the top 10 psychiatric drugs for this year, I think it is, or 20. I can't see the top of my slide, unfortunately. So what is that, 2018 maybe, or whatever it is. It's hidden by the Zoom bar. So anyway, so these are the drugs that are making the most money for these different companies. So I'm just going to walk you through, and then I think we'll take our break after this. Some of the psychiatric drugs that were approved in different years. Oh, thank you. I just couldn't see the top, Eddie, so thank you for telling me what that was. So it wasn't projections for those numbers. It was actual numbers in that last slide. So here's psychiatric drugs. Wait, can you get that? Psychiatric drugs that were approved in 2019. So Spravato, which is the nasal spray for ketamine. That's Janssen. Approved for the treatment-resistant depression in adults. And then we skipped to 2016. There really weren't psychiatric drugs developed between 2016 or approved, right, between 2016 and 2019. I might have missed one or two, but and I got this from centerwatch.com, which is a source for all drugs that are approved. So if you want to know what's coming down the pike, this is a good place to go. Okay. For 2016, then we had Nuplazid. It's for treating the hallucinations and delusions with Parkinson's psychosis associated with long-term L-DOPA treatment. And that was approved in May 2016. Then we go to 2015. Here's aripiprazole, extended release injectable. So it's not just an injectable, but it's an extended release. So that's where the technology of once you inject it, there's, chemically and material science-wise, they build it so it's going to release slowly over time. That was approved for in 2015 for treating schizophrenia. And then here's Rexulti, also approved in 2015 for the treatment of depression and schizophrenia. And here's Vraylar, I never say it right, Vraylar, that's it. And for schizophrenia and bipolar, approved in 2015. So they were kind of busy in 2015, maybe catching up. Here's 2014, the buprenorphine and naloxone, and this includes the delivery system, right? It's those little plugs that they put in under the skin. And here's Brintellix, Fatzima, and Zubsol. So these three were approved in 2013. But when you think about it, it's not a lot of drugs that have been approved over, the last 15, see, I got a few more. So I was looking basically for the last decade. And here's 2021 or 2011, Vibrid, and then here's Intermezzo, and then here's the Quizmia and the Quillavant. And so this is one for ADHD. Okay, so that's in a decade, the drugs that have been approved basically by the FDA for psychiatric applications. Here's 2019. And, and so some of these drugs we don't see a lot of, right? We don't really see Edluar or Fanapt. And here's Latuda, here's Aleptro, and Vivitrol. Okay, so these are all drugs that really haven't been on the market. And so these drugs are all under post-market surveillance still. And so any problems with any of these drugs, you're going to find out from FDA from their MedWatch list. Okay? It is required for Medicare Part D for all or substantially all drugs in these categories to be included: antidepressants, antipsychotics, convulsants, retrovirals, immunosuppressants, and cancer. Let's see, Janelle says, you're seeing a lot more Latuda and Fanapt over the last 3 years. And you know what? That is going to be as a result of sales. I think I told you all that I was taking Balsama for sleep. I've been an insomniac my whole life. And the last couple of years, pretty much after that the big earthquake, but the lava flow, I just was not getting more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. And so I'd also gained a lot of weight. I gained like 35 pounds from when I moved. So I asked my doctor if I could take Balsama, Suvorexant, which it's an orexin antagonist. It acts in the brain, and it acts in hypothalamic regions that control both sleep and hunger satiety. So my doctor put me on it. He had never heard of it. He said, the first thing he said was the drug rep, because of Merck product, drug rep has never told me about that drug. And that's where he gets his knowledge about drugs from, is the sales rep. So it may be, Janelle, that you're seeing more Latuda and Fanapt. I never say that one right either, but you may be seeing that because that's what the drug reps are pushing. And that's true for the psychiatrists as well. They go to these dinners that the drug companies offer, which are educational seminars, always a nice dinner, and then the sales rep is going to continue that relationship to talk to them about that drug. Now, we've changed those laws to some extent. I mean, drug companies used to pay you to go to Hawaii for a conference. Yeah, the dinners are good. But anyway, so, so that's partly why you're seeing different drugs. But it is, well, that's good to know, Janelle, that it inspired you to get more knowledge. So anyway, that's good. And I don't know how many of you go to those dinners, but, I don't see anything wrong with it, but I know that it does leaves an impression whenever, there's data that comes out or something, as to people become suspicious of that resource. All right, so anyway, I think I'm gonna stop on this slide. Let me just see what's the next slide. Yeah, I'll pick that one up next. Okay, so now we're an hour, right? Well, an hour and 10 minutes. We'll take our break. Do we need to do another attendance, Aiden? He may be muted, so I'm not going to worry about it. But why don't you guys just all, you do one a session? So we're really supposed to do 2 a session, but that's okay. We do 1 and we at least get that. So, okay, before and after lunch, that's fine. We'll leave it at that. So I'm going to pick up on this slide when we come back. You're all here. You're either there or perhaps you're there. So thanks, everyone. I hope you've been having fun, and really great spending some time with you all. What I do now in the revisions of the program is I meet with the students every semester, basically. I'm either teaching them or I just, impose myself on them for half an hour, but really to improve all of those issues that I know we've had for a while in terms of communication. So it's nice to spend time with you. Your questions are great. And, oh, Janelle, I got some students you can learn from about harassing me. No, I'm kidding. And I value the time. So anyway, so I will see you all in an hour and 10 minutes or so. Thank you.